This is a Triple J podcast.
Hello, welcome back to the Science with Dr. Karl podcast. My name is Lucy Smith, and this week we got into the world of bugs, insects, creepy crawlies, spiders with entomologist Dr. Robert Puckett, all the way from Texas, and environmental scientist Jess Ward-Jones, who could actually help you identify some of the bugs you see every day. We'll get into that a bit more in this episode, plus dispel some myths along the way. Are we really eating spiders and insects in our sleep? Are daddy longlegs really the most venomous spider? They just don't have the fangs to make it happen. And do bees have knees? We get into all of that and more. Let's jump in. Karl, it's a little crowded in the studio right now. We've got two guests with us.
We do, because we always say, gee, we really need an insect specialist. So we went with the situation that if a little is good, more is better. So we have two insect specialists. We have Professor Robert Puckett from Texas A&M University at College Station in the USA, of course. And he knows about the terrible fire ants that are spreading across Queensland. And apparently 95% of Australia is potential ground for them to live and survive, and we're not monitoring it. And we also have the fabulous Dr.
I'd love to be a professor.
Dr. Jess Ward-Jones, who has started up a little app called...
Oh, yeah, I didn't start it. Some other fabulous people
you're
did,
keeping it
but
going?
I'm letting
No,
people
you should take
know
credit for
it's
that.
called iNaturalist.
And you take photographs?
Yeah, you take a photo, you upload it into the app, and an AI will recognise what you've got in a few seconds, and then the photos go straight off to the CSIRO, and scientists get to use it for science.
Oh my gosh, so it's like Shazam, but
Yeah.
for bugs
It
or
is.
for... Yeah, that's so
And then you don't have to send the
interesting.
photo off to your weird bug-loving friend.
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
Please do, though.
Okay. Well, I want to get into a little bit more about your research. Robert, we'll start with you because you were actually part of the Senate inquiry earlier this year giving evidence on fire ants and their impact. Tell us a little bit about that and what brought you to that field of research.
Yeah, so I was asked to sort of share our lived experience with these ants in the United States. So what brought me to that area of research? Oh, yeah, so I was fortunate enough to go to work for a professor at a university when I thought I wanted to become a lizard biologist. And he said, you know what, I know you want to be like the next Steve Irwin or something, but you know what you call a biologist with a job, right? An entomologist. You see. And I've been employed since. Yeah.
So an entomologist, and what are some other kind of areas that you've gotten into? Because you got to tell me about these ant decapitating flies.
Oh, yeah? You want to know about those? So, yeah, so in South America, so this is where red imported fire ants come from, their range in South America. They compete with lots of other really competitive ants, but they also have a guild of phorid fly. So phorid is short for the family Phoridae, that's the family these flies belong to. They parasitize fire ants. And they actually inject an egg through the exoskeleton, typically in the thorax. It hatches inside the ant. The ant's doing normal stuff, ant stuff, foraging and defending the colony. But it's got a maggot inside, and the maggot is growing. And after about a few, 6 or 7 days, it has to wiggle through the constriction between the thorax and the head of the ant. And once it gets into the head, it's great. It's actually really satisfying for those of us that deal with red imported fire ants. But it gets into the head and it feeds on the tissue within, including the brains. And that kills the ant. Several hours later, the maggot produces an enzyme that breaks down the tissue that keeps the head attached to the body of the ant, and the head falls off. And inside the head, the fly pupates and becomes an adult.
Oh, my
Pops out.
gosh.
Yeah,
There
it's
was
awesome.
some concern on the text line with this one,
Yeah.
introducing a species.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there is cause for alarm here when it comes to that?
To think about introducing a species as a biocontrol, or
Yeah, I think people are burnt by the whole cane toad situation.
So I was here in 2017, and I remember the first public talk I gave. I got to that sort of little section of my presentation about fire ants, and I could just see the look on Australians' faces.
Yeah.
And then I realized, I was like, oh yeah, every biological control disaster that we're ever taught about in the United States, as we're taught to have caution in thinking about these things, happened in Australia, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure those are called for at this point. We introduced them into the United States because those ants are sort of there to stay. They've expanded to all of the territory that will support them. Mm-hmm. That's not the case yet in Australia. We hope that they don't break containment up in Queensland and they can eradicate them so that you will not have to think about introducing biological controls.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you've also looked into, I guess, urban insect pets like bed bugs, cockroaches, flies. We'll see if people have questions about that on 0439 75 7555. Jess, you've also worked for the Invasive Species Council. What is the biosecurity measure that y'all are working with, the Bug Hunt Project? What's that?
Yeah, cool. So basically, the concept is like there's only so many biosecurity officials. There's only so many places that government can be. So we're expanding. We want to try and expand those eyes on the ground, get a million more people looking in their backyards or wherever they go. And if you see a bug and you're really interested in your backyard, or if you're out on a walk, to snap a photo, upload it into this app called iNaturalist, and then you can figure out what it is, and it's interesting. It'll tell you all these fun facts, but it'll also go off to a database, and scientists can use it to learn about not only our native species, which we have maybe 300,000 different species of invertebrates in Australia, but also incursions of really damaging invasive ones as well.
And you've worked a lot when it comes to classification. What goes into classifying an insect?
Oh, well, traditionally, a lot of the time it's like measuring how long one segment of a leg might be, or how many hairs there are, or whether a spider has thumbs.
Spiders have thumbs?
Funnel web spiders, male funnel web spiders, some of them have thumbs. They're not opposable, but they do look like thumbs.
Okay.
But actually increasingly there's a bit of AI going on. So you just snap a whole bunch of photos, because there are so many thousands of species of bugs that it takes a long time. A lot of species are undescribed officially. AI is helping us decipher between them all, because biodiversity is resilience in an ecosystem.
Oh, well, we've already tackled so many different areas, but let's get to the questions, because if you've got a question about insects, bugs, classification, 0439 75 7555, someone already saying, I'm so here for entomology, consider me glued to the radio. Darcy in Hornsby, we're going to kick it off with you. Darcy, what's your question?
Good morning, doctors. Thank you for taking my question. I was wondering about the insect apocalypse and whether microplastics might have any effect on the decline in the insects, particularly with regard to their respiratory system and circulatory systems getting blocked up by the microplastics.
Even though I'm not an entomologist, I will start and then throw to the entomologist. Firstly, we've been following in Germany that there has been a massive decline in flying insects. And if you've been a sort of country driver in Australia for the last few decades, you'll have noticed that the number of insects that you ran into at sunset have dropped dramatically. Secondly, microplastics are pretty well everywhere. We find them in every drop of water that falls out of the sky, at the top of Mount Everest, at the bottom of the Marianas Trench, and in a plastic bottle containing 1 litre of water, there are 100,000 microplastic particles. Now, separately, we know that worldwide the human sperm count has gone down, and it's been a while to get this data because it varies how you measure it from country to country, but it's dropped by 50% in the last half century. Is it related to microplastics? We have no way of telling, because we do not have a control group on the planet where there are humans or insects that are not being besieged by this bunch of microplastics. So the straight answer is don't know. I'll now throw to Robert and Jess.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. So this is a difficult one because it forces us to speculate as scientists, And I think you have an interesting question. If for those listeners who are unaware of how insects breathe, they don't have a lung system like us. And in fact, their circulatory system is not really designed to carry oxygen around their bodies. Rather, they have spiracles, small holes in the exterior of their exoskeleton through which gases from the external environment move internally and bring oxygen directly to their cells. But could they become clogged? So does anybody on the panel have any sense of how large the particles are that we're talking?
We're talking of the order of microns, but
Right.
with the endocrinologists, who are the hormone specialists, what they use are the words endocrine disrupting chemicals. So it's not the physical size, but rather the microplastics act as pseudo-hormones that can have hormone-like effects, which can be good or bad or neutral in various living creatures. And the trouble is we don't have a control group anywhere on the planet.
That's right.
Oh, true. Okay. Thanks, Darcy.
Okay, no worries. Thank you very much.
We got Alison in Harvey Bay. Alison, you got a question about beetles. What's going on?
Good morning, doctors. My question is about beetle larvae in the garden. So I'm a keen gardener and I try to keep my garden insect friendly. And I get a lot of beetle larvae around the roots of plants. And a lot of gardeners, they kill them and feed them to the birds. And I'm not sure whether or not I should be getting rid of them out of the garden because in case they're Christmas beetles or something.
Oh, you don't want to get rid of those.
No.
Jess, what do you
No.
reckon?
It's true that sometimes, I mean, if you're talking about physical damage, beetle larvae do feed on the roots of plants often. But I would also consider them beneficial because when they're breaking down the nutrients in those roots, they're not taking them just away, but they're also contributing to like aeration in the soil. So it means that other like nutrients and airflow can happen in there, and that's good for a system. When their bodies break down, that nutrient goes back into there. It's just kind of part of the ecosystem. But it could be a Christmas beetle, yes. They do feed on roots, but could also be some kind of Argentinian scarab, which is not native, but not necessarily terrible. But I would say the best thing to maybe find out is to use iNaturalist. Take a photo, upload it into the app, and someone might be able to tell you.
Yeah, might be able to. Rob, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think I would just reiterate what Jess said. I mean, we get a lot of curiosity calls at the laboratory about, general insect pests around one's home or general insects that folks perceive to be pests, but sometimes they're not pests at all,
Yeah.
right? So the first step always in these questions is sort of what species are we dealing with?
Identify.
Do we need to think about limiting their access to our property or not, or let them go? A lot of times they're good guys.
Okay. Alison, you're going to have to do some identifying here. Take a photo.
Yes. Okay, I wasn't sure if you could tell, but
Yeah, grubs often look really similar. You could try raise it.
That's right. You could rear them out.
You could raise it in a little box, make sure it's got air, give it water, give it figure out what
We
it's
often
eating.
have to do this. We often have to do this to get adults to determine, to be able to identify them.
Yeah,
as a
grubs
species.
often look the same. It could be a moth even.
Oh.
But I always get amazed when I think of the concept that this white gloopy stuff can turn into a butterfly with wings.
It's amazing,
That
right?
whole metamorphosis thing just blows my mind every time.
Right, and that's the apex level of metamorphosis, right? These are holometabolous insects. These are insects that actually have a pupal stage. Often sort of joke when I give talks to the public, I say this would be like, you imagine a maggot, right? It looks like sort of this fleshy tube sock crawling around, absorbing its nutrients from the environment that its mother laid the egg on. And then there's a phase at which they there's a quiescent phase, and if you look at it, you think, well, that looks very boring, but really it's not boring at all. They're turning into an adult fly that now has wings and legs, and it's like it would be like as
eyeballs
if
and a
yeah,
brain.
right, and can
How
fly.
does mush turn into eyeballs and wings and a brain?
Well, it's magic, isn't it? So,
Yeah, like an egg. In an egg, you've got that white and that yellow gloopy stuff, and then you end up with a creature with a beak and a little pink fluff on it, and legs and eyes and a brain and everything. How does that happen?
yeah, well, each one of that gloopy stuff.
There's actually like anchor points inside that gloop.
Do
you know about that?
Right, in
Yeah.
that carry-on?
Yeah.
Anchor
Yeah.
points? Tell me more.
Often, like most of it turns into mush, but then there's like certain points that are like anchor points inside the mush that are consistent in most of the time.
Yeah.
And there's a really fun fact I love about grubs is like if you teach a caterpillar something when it's in a caterpillar form, and then it goes into its chrysalis, it turns into gloop. When it comes out a butterfly, it can actually remember that thing.
It's
What?
amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
They can transfer when they turn from gloop into a creature with hard structures. Memory can travel across.
Yeah, I don't know how.
Wow.
That is insane.
Yeah, it'd be as if you climbed into a sleeping bag one night and zipped up, and you stayed in there for about a month, and when you emerged, you looked like a kangaroo
were
or
still
something.
you.
It'd be that different,
What if you want to get into the field? I've got Ashleen here from the Blue Mountains. Ashleen, what's your question?
Hey, doctors.
Oi.
So I'm very excited to be on, by the way.
Oh, we love you too.
So I just wanted to know, how would someone become an entomologist in Australia? And do you know of any voluntary programs? I heard Jess mention bug hunt, but if there are any other voluntary programs that a new starter could get into?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I started as a kid rolling around in my backyard just picking up bugs and putting them in Tupperware. That was a good start. And then I found out that you can actually study entomology or even just conservation biology of bugs in general when I went to uni. And there's a whole bunch of universities in Australia that you can study diversity of life and entomology, and that's what I did. And then I volunteered to do some research on funnel web spiders, and I learned that they were super interesting and have thumbs, etc. And they get to 30 years old.
30?
Yeah, I can get up to 30 years old.
30?
Yeah. So
Wow.
Crazy.
lots of invertebrates have molts where they have like a certain amount of molts, maybe 7, and they call them instars. But mygalomorphs, so like big spiders that live underground, have an infinite amount of molts, and they just get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Wow.
Okay. Well, I want to touch on that again
Okay.
very soon. But so you're saying that you can study.
You
and
can definitely study. Yeah.
go to those volunteer programs as well.
Yeah, you can also, I know, at least I live in Canberra, the Australian National Invertebrate Collection at CSIRO, they take volunteers. I think you can probably volunteer if you're in Sydney at the Australian Museum. But yeah, also like your land care groups.
But couldn't you just start off doing your BSc and then head
Yeah.
into entomology?
Absolutely.
So it's just a straight Bachelor of
yeah.
Science.
Great.
Yeah, I think I really enjoyed going broad, and then I could see like how I could apply bugs, and I managed to apply it to lots of places.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ashleen.
Thank you. Thanks for your help.
Now, you mentioned the bolting. Ben in Hobart, what's your question?
Hello, I was just wondering, how do spiders grow so much larger when they molt? Because I have 2 pet spiders and they like double in size each molt.
Oh, cool. Okay. So they
I love
have.
that you say, "Oh, cool."
Oh,
I'm
cool.
like,
Yeah, I do.
No.
People say they've got a spider in the corner. I'm like, where? So I mean, their bodies they're like soft-bodied inside, and then they have an exoskeleton which hardens. So big spiders will molt indefinitely. Their body inside grows until it gets really tight, and then they kind of split down the middle, and then they lay on their back, and then they kind of like pop out, and then their soft body inside, which doesn't fit anymore, will sort of harden roughly overnight.
And that's so it's essentially them just growing, but then
Yeah,
having to
they just get a bit tight. Their clothes get a bit tight for them until they have to take them off and get a new one.
So this layer that grows, like, is it a tenth of a millimetre thick, and that then turns into a hard shell, and that's over their body and their legs? And how do they get the joints to work and all that stuff?
So if you think about vertebrates, so we're a vertebrate, we have bones inside and muscles on the outside. Invertebrates and insects have just kind of the opposite. They have their, what would be bones on the outside, their exoskeleton, and then they have muscles just like us, but they operate inside. So they would pull on all their joints the same kind of way we do, but the muscles are pulling from the inside.
But how do the muscles know where to attach when you just got this soft, sludgy stuff on the outside, and then gradually it hardens and becomes the new exoskeleton?
Yeah, I kind of think about
How's
it
that
like a
organised?
tree. It just kind of grows from the inside. It gets bigger and bigger except they lose their outside.
That's right. And then the arachnids, they'll continue to molt in adulthood. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
some
that's-
kinds of big, they call them mygalomorphs.
Yeah,
the
that's
big,
very
chunky
different from
ones.
insects. So
Yeah.
with insects, there's a terminal molt at which time they become an adult and they won't molt again. So your adult insects that you see flying around, those are not going to molt again in their lifetime.
Wow.
Oh,
That's
now,
it.
let me get this straight. Spiders are not insects because they've got 8 legs instead of 6?
That's one of the main characters for sure.
But they're not an
that you would
insect.
notice. Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. What makes them not an insect?
Ooh, well, what may... That's a good question.
How long do you need?
Yeah, well, so they're in a taxonomic classification group that's sort of quite different from insects, right? So if you look at an insect, you look at a spider, your eye will sort of tell you the answer to that question, right? It's like, well, so your insects have 6 legs, your spiders have 8 legs, your insects have wings. We don't have any flying spiders, fortunately, with those funnel webs, right? This is good news, right? And then so you've got all the other invertebrates, like your millipedes and centipedes, all that.
So many kinds of worms.
Correct, right, and your worms, right? So all of which are classified differently into different family groups.
Okay,
Or
so
taxonomic
if
groups,
it's
I
got
should
6
say.
legs, it can be an insect, but if it doesn't have 6 legs, it cannot be an insect.
That is correct.
Got to have 6 legs.
Got to have 6 legs.
Okay, right.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's stay with insects. We've got Peter in Brisbane. Peter, you got a question about fireflies?
Yeah, good day, morning, Dr. Karl.
Good morning. You got a question on? I love fireflies. I remember seeing them in Springfield in Minneapolis.
No, we've got rural property in northern New South Wales, and down by the creek on a quiet night, you'll occasionally get a swarm of fireflies. And I was just wondering how they generate their light.
Well, this goes back to the Bible. So you remember in the Bible, there's God. And remember, there was Satan, and Satan's his enemy, the bad guy. Well, it turns out that Satan was actually his mate, and he was called Lucifer, the light giver, and actually hung around on his right hand. So they had a fight, and then God kind of wrote Lucifer out of the Bible, but his name still hangs around in the chemical luciferase. So there's a chemical called luciferase, and when it acts on various substrates, it will give out light at a very high efficiency. So an incandescent light bulb in the old days, maybe 10% of the energy would go into light, but with luciferase, you've got this chemical, and it acts on another chemical. A's means enzymes, and you are looking at 80 to 90% efficiency. And a huge number of species, a very high percentage of species, I think it's of the order of 50% in the deep ocean, can generate light to talk to each other because it's all dark down there, and luciferase is the chemical. So how do fireflies make light? They do it via luciferase, and I think it was in Springfield in Kentucky I saw them around the City Hall Congress, the central administration area. I couldn't believe it. They were just everywhere, so many fireflies. So how many do you get where you are?
Oh, it's hard to say how many, but they're like in a swarm, so it's got to be a dark and quiet night, and then you just look around the bush and there they are, just swarming around, and they are cool as,
Mate, and they're for free. It costs you nothing.
That's right, yeah. So my family vacations in the Midwestern United States, and the first year that we went up, about 10 years ago, I was shocked at how many there were. It reminded me of my childhood in Texas. We don't see them very frequently any longer in Texas.
And that's the thing, you don't see them very more. So we are doing bad things to some of the insect species. I've heard...
Well, I was going to relate this to red imported fire ants.
Really?
Yeah, there's some evidence that those ants are having an impact on the population of fireflies in our state.
Wow.
And the saying is that if all the humans vanished, life would go on.
That's right.
But if all the insects vanished, there'd be a very, very radical change to life.
Correct.
We need them. They are essential.
Now, you mentioned vacationing. Matt in Victoria, I think this is a relatable question. What do you want to know?
Yeah, hey doctors. I was just wondering how you can check hotel beds for bed bugs.
And apparently we almost eradicated bed bugs for decades. And what has happened that they've come back?
Well, a number of factors have contributed to this resurgence of bed bugs that started about 20 years ago around the globe. A couple of things that work there. First and foremost, they become resistant to commonly used insecticides. And so the pyrethroid insecticides first. These were widely used pesticides around the globe. And interestingly, in the United States, we shifted then to neonicotinoid insecticides indoors.
Oh, the neonics, they don't like them much,
well, I think you guys did. You shifted also, but then very quickly it started becoming very clear they were resistant to those insecticide classes as well. So now we're sort of running out of arrows in our quiver to throw at these guys. But yeah, you can inspect your room for them. If for those of you out there who have not seen bed bugs before, I think a lot of folks operate with the understanding that they're so tiny you will never be able to see them. And that's the case in terms of the first instars, the first developmental stage of the insect. They're very, very tiny. I have a photograph that I use in presentations where we've got a first instar nymph on a U.S. penny, which of course has Abe Lincoln's bust on it, and the insect itself is the size of the bow tie on a penny. Right. The adults rather are rather large. They're about the size, shape, and color of an apple seed.
So you can see them.
Oh, yeah, you can see them. Yeah, you can see them crawling around. So what we tell folks to do, and entomologists do this, Jess, I'm sure you check your rooms when you travel around because it doesn't matter what level of hotel you're staying in. Look for them. And the way you do this is to pull the bedding back, the comforter and the fitted sheet. If you find a mattress encasement, it's unlikely that you're going to have bed bugs on the bed. But if you don't find a mattress encasement, look along this, I think they call it the tape edge, the ribbon, hard ribbon along the top and bottom of the mattress. They love to hide in there. And two things you'll find. If you have an active infestation, you'll find the insects. But if you've had a previous infestation, you'll likely find they're defecant. So they take a liquid blood meal from their hosts, and then they defecate on the fabric itself. So you get these dark little spots. You'll see them all over.
Matt, you got that?
Yeah, no worries.
We've got Scan from Wodonga. Scan, I would hope this scenario wouldn't happen. What is your question?
Hey, doctors. My question is, if you got lost in the bush, could you swat mosquitoes and eat them to survive until you were found?
Ugh. What do you reckon, Rob?
You got meat? I don't know, Rob.
So this is an interesting question. Mosquitoes, huh? Specifically mosquitoes. That's a lot of swatting for a small...
Because they're big mosquitoes down here in Wodonga.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, big ones.
Yeah,
Right.
lots of... Oh, how big? How big are your species?
Oh, pretty big, mate.
Like millimeters?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like 5.
5 millimeters?
Yo.
Yep.
Well,
They're
now,
big-
are
big
you
suckers.
swatting already blood-fed mosquitoes that have a nice big
iron
sack of
intake.
bloody protein inside and all of that?
Oh, well, if it's at night time, you couldn't tell because you just swat them,
Yeah,
mate.
you couldn't
you
tell,
know?
could you? This reminds me of a hypothetical that I've bounced around with folks in the U.S. We celebrate crawfish season in Texas and Louisiana, where we have these big boiling pots, and you put a bunch of crawfish in. It's a very communal event, and then somebody throws them out on a table. Well, they're boiled inside their exoskeleton, right?
Yep.
And so I've speculated before that because you got to stand there and crack them. You know, you have a beer with your friends and you crack these shells open. They're delicious, but the kernel you get out probably isn't very calorie rich. So you stand there for hours and you eat through these things and tell jokes and all this kind of thing. I think if that's all you had available to you for your nutrients, you would starve to death in about 6 months because you put more energy into breaking those exoskeletons open and digging out that little piece of meat. And I think that goes here, right? I think you would exhaust yourself, your energy, swatting mosquitoes.
Okay,
of course, you're only doing it at night, though. That's
So you
right.
need 2 experts.
This is awesome,
One
man.
would be a physiologist who'd put you inside a whole body box, firstly measure your basal metabolic rate, and then while you were swatting, so you'd have to use energy to shove them in your mouth, your carbon dioxide output would go up and they could work out how much energy you were expending to catch them. Then you'd have to catch some of these mosquitoes, work out how much energy there is in them and how much of that you can extract, and then balance the two against you and see if you'd actually be heading down a positive pathway where you could actually put on weight, or you'd be losing weight, or you'd stay neutral.
Correct.
But they're the 2 specialists who'd be needed: the dietitian and the physiologist with the whole body box to measure metabolic output. I'm relatively confident the experiment has not yet been done.
And, of course, you'd have to... you wouldn't have those insects available to you during the cold season, so you'd have to have a different set
Hibernation.
of nutrients.
You'd have to
I
get
think
lost.
if you're in the bush, you might try eat some other.
That's right. You'd be
Other
better
bugs.
off finding some
Try some
plants
worms.
that are edible.
Yeah.
Thanks, doctors.
Thanks, Gan. We've got Alex in Sydney here. Alex, you got a question about fire ants.
Hello. Just curious about the effects of the insect growth regulators when they use it to treat fire ants in the environment.
Yeah. Hey, Alex. I'm glad you asked that question. You should be interested in that. I would be concerned if your population of Australians weren't concerned about the use of those products. But what I've shared with people in country, I've talked to a lot of people that are concerned about this. And I think what I would say is, if somebody calls me up at the laboratory and they say, hey, I've just moved to Texas and I've got fire ants. I want to do something about them, but I want to use the least toxic method possible. That's what I would point them to. Most folks in our state keep fire ant bait products at their houses to treat for their fire ants, and this is an annual occurrence, but most folks use much harsher chemicals than what you guys are using here as part of your eradication program. I would not be concerned about the use of juvenile hormone mimics to destroy your fire ants. I'm not concerned about that at all.
No.
Does it have an effect on the broader ecology of the area, as in other native insects, etc.?
Yeah, well, so in the States, I have to be very careful how I answer this because we've studied this for decades. Very few ants where we're applying those baits are capable of outcompeting red imported fire ants for the baits that we put on the ground for them. Now, that may be different in your system. I don't know. Your entomologist will have to work on answering those questions. But here's the thing. The idea is that this is a short-run eradication program, and if successful, it'll be over and done in a few years. So even if some species were impacted in the area up in Queensland by the baits, I think they would recover very quickly. But if you let those fire ants go through your country, the effect is going to be disproportionate compared to using baits in the short run, I'm afraid. I know it's not fun to think about having to push insecticides into your system, but I would certainly recommend it in this case.
We got Steph in Adelaide. Steph, you got a question about cicadas?
I do. Hi, doctors. I have recently learnt that they spend either their larval or nymph phase underground for like 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
What are they doing down there? What's their purpose?
Oh, basically just living. Just live it. It's a really nice place to be. It's temperature regulated, more so than being out in the air. And their food basically comes to them. Roots come down, they feed on their roots.
And we haven't solved the problem of how they count. And the trees will put more or fewer nutrients into the ground, and so they'll grow bigger. How do they count? Where in their brain is the bit that counts to a prime number, 13 or 17 or 11, and then they go, okay, time to come out, but they do come out. We haven't found that bit out.
Yeah, pretty incredible. Because basically they only come out when they reach the adult stage, and that's when they're breeding. So they just come out to breed. Apart from that, it's really nice being underground.
And the advantage of coming out on prime numbers is that it means that two different populations will come out only very rarely. If they came out every 2 years and 4 years, well, there'd be a lot of them and not enough food to go around. But if they come out every, say, 287 years or whatever, then there's they will tend not to eat up all the food supply, and both populations can survive.
We've got Mel on Wiradjuri country. Mel, what's your question?
Hi, doctors. How are you all today?
Good, thanks.
Okay.
Tell me, why are cockroaches so resilient?
Well, I think I can go at that a bit. It's sort of like our bed bugs, like we discussed earlier. They become resistant very quickly to insecticides, different classes of insecticides. And so like our German cockroaches, we're always chasing down new insecticides to trial on those, either in the form of a bait or a contact insecticide, because they have so many generations per year. And each of those mating events, when they do mate, there's an opportunity there for genetic mutation that will cause them to be resistant. And once a few individuals in a population are resistant, then of course they're going to be the ones that successfully mate in the next generation and then pass those genes on through the population. So yeah, I think that's largely the answer to your question. The other thing is that they're just the cockroaches that we deal with in our homes and commercial buildings. We refer to them as domestic cockroaches. They are reliant on us. You will never find German cockroaches kind of hanging out in a forest somewhere. You will only find them around human dwellings.
And it's actually a lie that mistruth that the cockroaches are resistant to radiation. They are about 10 times more resistant to ionising radiation than we are, but there are creatures that can survive hundreds and even thousands and tens of thousands of times. They do have another advantage in that they're curved on the top, and when they go running, they lift up at the front from the Bernoulli effect, and they can travel very quickly on their back legs. And they also have two organs on the back called a circus, so the two of them are circi, and they are aware of wind currents. So if you come with the favourite weapon, which is the rolled up newspaper, if you come from one side or the other, the circus on that side will sense the wind current, and without even involving the brain of the creature, it will start scuttling in another direction. So when you try to squash a cockroach with a newspaper, make sure you appraise the situation first, then bang it along the centre line of the body.
Okay, good advice. Bryson in Byron, what's your question?
Hey, doctors, how you going?
Pretty good, Dr. Bryson.
I was just wondering, if daddy longlegs have the most potent venom, but they can't actually bite humans, how do you actually measure it?
So that was told to me by my 7-year-old daughter Lola, who said very solemnly, daddy longleg spiders are the most poisonous spiders in the world, but they cannot hurt us because their fangs are too short to get through our skin, and it has 4 mistakes in that one sentence alone.
Oh.
So firstly, not all daddy longlegs are spiders. Sure, they got 8 legs, but some of them are opilionoids with 2 eyes, and some of them are spiders with 8 eyes. Secondly, the word poisonous is wrong. Poison is something that lands on that comes into your mouth and kills you. They have a venom, so venomous is the right word, which you used, Dr. Bryson, so you did say it right there. Thirdly, the most poisonous. Well, the opinionists do not have poisonous glands, but of the spiders, there's about 20,000 species, of which 50 are venomous, and the venom has been collected. You then anaesthetise the spider with carbon dioxide, and then you apply tiny electric shocks to the right part of their anatomy, and then you put a very thin glass pipe up against the fangs, and you can collect about 2 billionths of a litre of this liquid per spider, and when you do it a couple of thousand times, you've got enough to test. And it turns out to be incredibly weak. And finally, are the fangs too short to penetrate your skin? And a savage did this experiment, and he shoved his arm in a bunch of spiders and the daddy long legs, and they did sort of puncture his skin. And instead of going, oh my God, I'm going to die, he went, ouch.
Okay, so it's a myth.
It's a myth, sorry, Dr. Bryson.
We got Taz in Wodonga. Taz, what's your question?
G'day, doctors. I was just wondering, do bees have knees?
The bee's knees.
The bee's knees. The short answer is yes.
Oh, yeah.
They would have at least 6. They've got 6 legs. Just like we were talking about before, they have an exoskeleton and they have their muscles on the inside. So they have knees, but probably no kneecaps.
Okay. So the bee's knees, they do exist. Ed in Melbourne, what do you want to know?
Hey, just wondering the old myth about spiders and bugs crawling in your mouth when you're asleep. Just wondering if that's actually true or just a wise tale.
I read some. This is the ABC. You can't say old wives' tale. We're fully awake. You've got to say the story of an elderly female domestic engineer. Just thought we'd get that out of the way. I read about this in Snopes, SNOPES, and they did the figures, and it turns out for a bunch of reasons, like they keep away from your mouth because they might get eaten or killed, and you would notice that is a myth, but people still say you eat half a kilogram of spiders every night. It ain't true.
Okay. Lisa in Brizzy, final question. What have you got?
Hi, doctors. My question is the introduced flies, what effect will they have on our native ants?
Are you concerning yourself with the flies for the red imported fire ants?
Yes.
For their biocontrol? Well, so you have not had an introduction of those flies into your system.
Oh.
Which is, and hopefully you won't have a need to. If the eradication program works as designed, those ants will be out of your system so quickly that they would never support a population. You won't need them. We use them in the States because our population of fire ants is entrenched. But the beauty there is that they have no effect on any other species except for the red imported fire ant.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. They're tightly associated parasitoid and host group from South America. And they do not attack. Well, I should say there is a species of fire ant that's also invasive in our part of the United States that they will attack, but they will not develop to adulthood. So it wouldn't support a population. You might lose a few ants, but you wouldn't lose a species.
Thanks for your question, Lisa.
Thank you.
Robert, you've been with us on Triple J. If we want to find more about what you do, where should we go? Are you on socials? Do you have a website? What's the vibe?
The easiest way is just to email me, rpuck@tamu.edu. I'm at Texas A&M University in the Department of Entomology. You can look us up on the web. We've got a forward-facing website, and we're there for you.
Jess Ward-Jones has been with you as well, an environmental scientist. Jess, you mentioned an app earlier. Where can we follow what you're doing?
Yeah, so my Instagram handle is Jess Likes Bugs, just _ likes bugs. Or you can check out the Bug Hunt on by Googling the Bug Hunt, Invasive Species Council Bug Hunt, or just go straight ahead and download iNaturalist for free on your app store.
Go start shazamming those bugs. We love it. Dr. Karl, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Robert Puckett and Jess Ward-Jones, for being on this episode of Science with Dr. Karl. So interesting. Y'all are legends. Oh, and enjoy your time in Australia, Robert.
Yeah, sure will. I have.
Yeah.
I love your country.
Oh, so good. Karl, I'll catch you next week.
Peachy Keen.
Well, there you have it. Now you know how to potentially eliminate a cockroach and check for bed bugs. Your next accommodation. Oh, I feel like they're crawling on me. My name is Lucy Smith. This episode was produced by Maria Dimitrakis. If you want more guest episodes, take a scroll through the podcast feed. Last week we caught up with Dr. Matt Agnew, who taught us a hell of a lot about AI. Make sure you like, rate, subscribe, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Dave Marchese here from the Triple J Hack team. Hey, if you love Dr. Karl's podcast like I do, you might enjoy the Hack podcast as well. Each day we bring you the news that matters to you, from the latest science on climate change to what's happening in politics and news around the world. The Hack podcast. It's your daily fix of the news you need to know. Get it wherever you're listening now.